far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees. Good day, everyone. I'm Donna Jones Simmons, co-author, co-founder, and the architect of the 100 ABC Women project, as well as the executive producer of our fireside chats. Special thanks to our incredible technical support team, our moderator and panelists, who are the drivers behind our weekly inspirational conversations. Let me now turn you over to our moderator, who will introduce herself to you, as well as today's topic. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. It is such a beautiful day to have you join us for this fireside chat and for this important conversation in recognition of International Women's Month. So my name is Janelle Scarrett, and I am your moderator for today. Amongst the many different ways I can describe myself, I would say that my main role in our community is as a connector of people. And I also am currently working as the CEO for York Region Children's Aid Society, as well as being the co-owner of Adinkra Farm. So it's really a pleasure to be here today. I also want to reflect a little bit on International Women's Month and remind us of the sacred role that we play as women, as nurturers, as protectors, and of our divine connection to all that is. There's so much out there, and I listen to my son's music sometimes and I'm thinking, we need to change the way we think about ourselves as women and talk about ourselves. And so it's really a pleasure to have some powerful women here today to lead us in a discussion about families in crisis, considering how we can maintain good mental health while keeping our families together. And so as we talk today, we honor the women in our lives who have managed to do all of that in the face of all that we face. And so I am thinking about that. And sometimes I sit in wonderment, wondering, how do they do it? How did they do it? And I'll just tell you one small example of that. I remember that when I was growing up, we would go on Sundays to watch my father and others play soccer. But my grandmother and my mom would always have a trunk full of food. And it was incredible to see how they were able to do that. And I think it's those little memories that kept our family together as a family, the meals we ate together, the fancy things that they would produce. And I'm not just talking about a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken coming out of that trunk. There would be callaloo and ginger beer and sorrel and pilau. And I'm thinking, when did they have time to prepare all of this? Anyway, so it's really my pleasure here today to welcome our guests. So we have Pastor Grosvenor, we have Michelle Monroe, and we also have Takia Wedderburn. So I'm going to let these wonderful women introduce themselves, starting with you, Pastor.
Well, thank you, my sister, and good afternoon, everyone, to moderators and coordinators, producers, and the 100 women, and certainly my co-panelists. And my name is fully Pastor Jeanette Wright Grosvenor. I'm the founding pastor of Grosvenor's Ministries since 2002. It's an international Christian outreach ministry, and also the producer of New Beginning Services International. It's a pastoral care counseling center. And I'm an award-winning author, a producer, a radio show host, TV show host, and also the key thing is I'm the former founder of the Black Women's League, as well as the Community Counseling Center. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
We are so fortunate to have you and can't wait to hear the pearls of wisdom that you'll share with us this afternoon. And Miss Michelle Monroe, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Greetings, everyone. Such a pleasure to be on this afternoon. Such incredible women to be in your presence. Let me first give thanks to the ancestors for granting me this moment and this opportunity, but also to 100 accomplished to have me here. I always want to begin to ground myself in what grounds me. I'm a mama of 2 incredible children. I'm a wife of an incredible man. I am an auntie to so many, many, many. And by day, I am with the Toronto District School Board, been in that role far too long, I tend to say, but it grants me the ability to impact and change lives in a way that was identified as my purpose a very long time ago, which I continue to walk in. By evening, I do run my own consulting company, which is actually focused on the very same thing. So I'm pleased and honored to be with you.
Well, thank you so much. And we also will be really blessed to hear what you have to say today. So Takia, can you please give an introduction of yourself?
Hello and good afternoon to everyone. And again, I just want to give thanks to Ms. Donna Jones Simmons for this opportunity to be here this afternoon. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here again amongst some amazing, beautiful, wonderful, talented Black women. And just want to say thank you for the opportunity. So again, my name is Takia Wedderburn. I'm a child and youth counselor with the Toronto District School Board. I've been with the Toronto District School Board for about, I believe, almost 10 years now, about 9 years. So I do that. That is my full-time job. So I do work with students that are being marginalized and that are facing a lot of difficulty, really just struggling academically, also as well struggling at home, personally as well. I do have a nonprofit organization that I created back in 2015. It's called the Natural Kids Movement. I've done a lot of volunteer work in the child welfare sector. Really the child welfare sector is really another one of my passions. So with my nonprofit organization, I do put together customized care packages for Black youth that are in foster care. And really just to provide them with some empowerment, as a lot of, oftentimes they may not have access to culturally sensitive personal care products and whatnot. And yeah, that's just a little bit about me, and I'm very happy to be here.
Wow, such important work that you are doing. I really appreciate hearing all that these women who we're going to hear from today have been involved in. And so let's get straight into the questions. And really, we have a conversation style, so take it away. So I am going to ask my first question directly to Pastor Jeanette Grover. And so what do you constitute as family crisis?
Basically, what would constitute a crisis is anything that's happening within your family, not necessarily the entire family, but a majority of some people or a certain close-knit immediate family. It could be various things such as a death in the family. It could be violence in the family. It could be abuse. It could be simple things as a simple illness, cancer, all sorts of things that happen like that. Something else that we don't consider these days, and it's very important, we've got the mental health situation that we have to take a look at, and they actually even go in crisis themselves too. So then that only escalates the situation for the family. Financial is important. A lot of people don't consider that a crisis, but you know, when it gets to a point that you're struggling and you're stressed out and you can't pay your rent or you can't pay your mortgage, you might lose your covering over your head. You might not be able to feed your family. And so that definitely substitute as crisis.
Most definitely. I can see that there are many things. Another issue that I know from working in community services that really throws a family into that state of crisis has to do with addictions. Addictions to different substances and so on. And sometimes people turn to those substances as a way to medicate away or make the pain go away from those other stresses that
Right, a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I would put that under the category of illness because
yes, indeed.
For too long, you know, especially for our community, and I don't want to put it out there, but I got to say the truth. When we had people in our family who had these addictions, we as a community looked at it as an illness. Outside our community just saw it as they were on drugs. Right. And it only became an illness when it hit their community, and then they started to deal with it and address it. But we've been acknowledging it for a long time, and our families and our community have always kind of been there. The alcoholism and all of that all sort of fell under the same window. And we as a community, we looked at it as the illness that it was. And it's good that it's being acknowledged outside now, but you know, sometimes it's a little too late because a lot of our people have been branded badly for it or scarred permanently, which is very unfair. And that in itself becomes the crisis as well.
Yeah, I think we really became experts at dealing at speaking two languages. One, dealing with the stigma
Mm.
attached as you're describing it, but also dealing with nurturing and caring for people in our own communities. I wonder if Michelle, you would have any comment on that.
My additions to what would be deemed a family crisis, I'd add a couple of things. It's when the entire unit itself or individuals within that unit is thrust into a stressful situation.
Mhm,
When individuals or the entire unit has difficulties coping,
mhm,
when individuals or that unit begin to express difficulties just dealing with various simple regular day coping things, right? No
right,
longer can manage doing the everyday routine things that we've usually done. And when individuals or the entire unit feel that they're just isolated and alone and having absolutely no supports.
right.
That's how I'd simply say, and I would echo that that varies for families or
Mhm,
individual units within that family. And so a crisis could be large, but it could be small, right?
mhm,
And sometimes we pay attention only to the large ones when it's the
mhm.
small ones that are actually eating at the family unit and taking it apart. And so we've got to pay attention to all of it to be able to figure out what exactly it is to be able to determine how we're moving to it. And I do want to say one last thing on this, that it's really essential that we recognize crisis is not always a negative thing. It can also offer us opportunities as, and I'm sure we'll touch upon that as we talk further.
Yeah, most definitely the slow boiling ones that
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes come back to haunt us, and we tend to think, oh, it's just. But I've heard a lot of talk since we started having this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about death by a thousand cuts. It's just the little things that we face every day that make us that break our will, that break our ability to cope, as you said. Takia, would you like to add any comments to the conversation?
Sure, definitely. I think just to echo what my fellow panelists also mentioned, I think for me, family crisis is really just a family's inability to cope
Mm,
with just everyday life. And as Michelle had mentioned, I think that a crisis could be big, it could be small as well. And oftentimes, sometimes it may be visible, other times it may not be visible. And it's really just a family's inability to cope with every day. And I think in terms, I believe every family does have, in terms of like their coping abilities, I think every family has different abilities. And I think also as well, culture, I would say definitely plays a big factor in terms of a family's ability to deal with crisis. I know that there are certain cultural practices where crisis is not, it's not talked about. It's not something that you make public. And then other cultures as well, crisis is really something that you would share. You would share within your within other members, whether it be within the immediate family or within the extended family, and they really just come together to really just to support that family during that time of difficulty.
yeah, and thinking about what you've said, and pondering the next question, which has to do with the difference between a crisis and a family crisis, it makes me think of the principle of Ubuntu and that interdependence. And so one way of looking at it is that this crisis is happening to that individual family or to the individual within the family. But then if we go by our principled understanding of things, then we expand that to understand that there's something that we need to be doing as a community to deal with crisis, whether it's happening to one family or in small amounts, or whether it's something that we can see as a trend within our community. I wonder if you would want to comment a bit on that, Michelle.
I
Yeah,
would like
go
to
ahead.
make one comment on that. We all know the statement, it takes a village.
Mhm.
And I think in the Western world, things are dealt with very privately.
Mm,
In our culture, and I'm going to say that because our culture is so diverse. We come from Caribbean, we come from South American, we come from African, we're all over, but the bulk of our community, we have a tendency of, we have layers of how we deal with a crisis. There's the crisis that you deal with internally, the little small, simple things, as Michelle would say, some things are big and some are small, but some of them require it moving out to another layer of family, the outside family, maybe an in-law family or your immediate sibling family, so to speak, to help with the crisis. And then there's different tiers. And then it gets to that part of the community. But the thing about it, and being from a cultural West Indian background, the crisis was, if it was in your household, then it included your neighbors because everybody could hear all your business. So everybody was involved and everybody could help. But then there was always that hush hush aspect of, well, because you don't want to bring shame. And so that is the other thing I think Takia was mentioning, that we have a tendency of tight-lipping on certain types of crisis because, as we said, a stigma. And we have to bypass that because help is help. And if you don't get the help that's required, sometimes what could have started off maybe small can get huge. It's like a sore. If you don't treat the sore, it could turn into gangrene. The next thing you know, you're cutting off a limb. So we have to, as a community, try to be open and not so judgmental, to be able to try to be a support. And I think that's a key thing that we need to look at.
If I could just jump in here, as you spoke of the idea of Ubuntu, and what comes to me initially is this idea, if we look at the state of our communities, we'll see the reflection of that just morphing out in our individual units and family units, whether extended or not, right? And as I was listening to Kia talk about what she's seeing in the education system with our children and needing supports and struggling, what I keep thinking is, if the education is seeing our children struggling, imagine what's happening behind closed doors, right? What are our parents dealing with? How are they trying to cope? How are they managing? If we are seeing ourselves overrepresented and underserved in the mental health services, in healthcare, imagine what's happening within our closed doors when we're left to manage and deal with those things on our own. So what is manifesting itself externally is playing itself out in huge ways internally in our immediate families. But how are we coping? Where are the supports coming from? And I think sometimes that's what speaks to that silence, right? Because when our children are going out and people are seeing that, it creates a sense of shame that puts us in silence, right? And so when we may be seeing something outside and the parents inside are figuring out, not sure what to do, not sure where to go, or what I hear a lot is, I have knocked on so many doors, I have done the best I can, I'm not sure where to go now, I'm tired. Michelle, I'm tired. I just can't do this anymore. And so there is a key connection about how, as a community, we support our individual community members and families, and how, as a family, we open ourselves up to the community to be able to receive the supports in a way that doesn't come as judgment or criticism, but just as that, trying to make sure that the village is there to support each other.
Yeah, that requires a significant trust.
Yes.
That I think, for some of the reasons that we've talked about already, the fact that we are not a monolithic people, that we're here together, sharing land on Turtle Island, sharing communities, and sharing an identity that connects us in one way, but then we know that we have so many differences. Layered on top of that, you've got family dynamics and different ways of interpreting what family means. And then layered on top of that, you've got the intergenerational trauma caused by both colonialism and the interruption to our history by the transatlantic slave trade. So you've got a lot of things happening that themselves make the perfect storm for a crisis. And then we have to interact with the external society and how it thinks about us, how it looks about us. And then, I was at a conference the other day talking about children's mental health, and Dr. Natisha Massaquoi mentioned a fact that I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. But she was addressing particularly the question of why do we have to think about anti-Black racism? And she said to those that were making a commitment to doing something about anti-Black racism, that when you think about it, our children, and then I'm extrapolating that to our people, are the only group that can watch a murder of a person from our community on television, in shows. It's guaranteed to happen, if you watch television shows where there's violence and intrigue and that sort of thing. But then we watched it in real life recently, and we watched a beating recently. You can turn on the internet and be exposed to that, and you can see the devaluing, diminishing, and harm to Black bodies as a regular part of our diet interaction with each other. So I think that piece right there adds that layer of trauma that's the baseline for our existence. And you spoke about one of your key roles being as a mother. As she was speaking about that, I realized that every time I see the news or I pick up the paper and I know that someone, or I hear, now it's not so much the paper, but it's TikTok and it's Instagram and it's Facebook and all these things, I actually get that physical tightness in my belly that I feel, and I carry it also sometimes in my back. And geography is not a concern. So if I hear about something across the world, in Mississauga, and it's affecting me. It's not my direct community, but I think my sons are out there, my brothers are out there, my brothers and sisters are out there. Anyway, so all of
But
those things.
this is part of the post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's generation. It's from back when, because we as a community, we feel what our other brothers and sisters, no matter where they are, feeling, because we can relate, we can comprehend, we can be afraid, especially Michelle and Janelle, we're parents, we have children, and especially if you have boys, you're even more frightened. But the thing is, it becomes a reality. During the time that all these things were happening with the George Floyd thing, I mean, how many people were getting depressed? I mean, that crisis didn't just hit us because we saw it and I couldn't watch it, because I had to keep myself out of crisis mode so I could help others in crisis mode. But what happens is we become, like you said, distrustful. We become distrustful of the entity or the establishment that is supposed to be set up to help us. You can't help us if you cannot comprehend what we're going through, or you don't have the right kind of empathy to deal with what we're going through. And more importantly, if you're not prepared to really, truly listen to what we're going through. We become distrustful even in our own community. It's not even so much that it's always judging at times, but sometimes what happens is we have a hierarchy in our own community. We have various prejudices, we have various layers of wealth and various aspects of culture. Maybe this one is more Pan-African than this one, and this one doesn't act Black enough, or, there's just so much there that we as a community struggle to begin with, that we are in crisis and now we have to deal with other people's crisis and maybe we can't handle it. And I think the important thing is the key people in the community who can actually help are voices like yourselves, Michelle and Janelle, who are out there. We have to be very visible. And it's like a business. You have to promote, because you need everybody to know what's available for them. And if they're not available, then we need people like 100 ABC Women who are watching all the people who are developing these programs to try and help our community.
Thank you so much for that. I'm just glancing at the comments in the chat, And I see that people have added some definition to crisis. They talk about death and divorce, and that can throw children into crisis. I know that we see that, and I think, you know, it's definitely in the school system. It will come out in the way that children are interacting. And then incarceration that rips families apart. And we know that within Black and Indigenous communities here in Canada, the prison population is very high with us. And so I think those things are also factors, and we've been talking about some of those things as well. But there's a question that I wanted to pose to you that came from one of the folks in the chat, and it has to do with how we can support families who have teens that present challenging behaviors like not wanting to attend school and just basic disrespect. And then I would throw in there that I personally think it's a crisis. The amount of time that I'm in a conversation about NIGGA versus the hard R with young people. So a lot of things that we're dealing with. But could you comment on that?
I'll start out the door with that one. And I say that because I have two at home right now. I have a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old. And the first thing I'm going to say is, how do we take our id and our egos out of the way? Here's what I mean by that. Many of us are examples of parenting a particular way. And whether we like it or not, we have taken that style of parenting into our role of parenting with a generation that is of a different way of being and thinking and operating. And many of us are still stuck in that way of operating. What do I mean by stuck? That are you hearing what I'm saying? This is my house. You will do what I do in the way in which I say you do it. Well, what do you mean? Did I just hear you disrespect me? And you don't get to do that in my house. And I'm giving those as examples of some of the things we carry, which gets in our way of effectively hearing our children, this generation, and being able to provide the necessary supports they require. So that's the first thing I say. Can we get out of our way to somehow balance what we've brought from our way of being parenting into transitioning into parenting our children now? The second thing is listen, and talk less. The less we talk, the more we learn from our children, and the more we're able to offer supports in them. If we have teenagers at this point who are saying, I don't want to go to school, there's no energy to do it because I don't want to be there, there's one of two things happening in this. One, the environment in which they're going in is toxic and harming them. I'm going to say that again, parents. The environment in which they're going every day is toxic and harming them. And not lifting them up, encouraging them and motivating them. So they're asking, why do I need to be there every day? Or secondly, there's something that they're individually, personally struggling with, and their way of saying, I don't want to, is their way of communicating that something is wrong with me, that there's something going on that I can't express to you. I just know I can't get up. I don't have the energy. I'm very lethargic. And that's when we do less get up and go school. What do you mean you're not going? That's when we do less of that and say, how can I help you work through this? Tell me what it is you're feeling. Is there some supports that I can get from you? So I'll leave it at those two and opening up my colleagues, and we can go from there.
I totally agree. There's that listening thing. Hey, I'm a pastor. I'm a bad pastor. I'm going to say that now. I put it out there for the world. I was the rebel in the church. I initially started as a youth pastor because my gift is young people. I love young people. I love youth. And one of the things that I was able to do, and I tell every parent out there when I do counseling, as much as you don't like it, you need to be prepared to hear everything you do not want to hear. And you have to accept it. You cannot go off. because the minute you stop and shut down your children, they will shut and stop, and they are closed off. And it's so difficult to open it back up. And as much as you might not want to hear something, you have to deal with yourself. I loved how Michelle said that. I loved it. You have to be able to step back. We know you're big, bad, and important, and you gave birth, and I brought you in this world, and all them things that we all know we have to say. But the fact of the matter is that you can't really take them out, and they know that. But the fact is, if you are not prepared to be open with them, they're not going to be open with you. But there's still a line of boundary, because you have the opposite side where everybody wants to be your friend. I can remember my father, when I said to my mother, what? And he'd call me in the room, you think she's your friend? Okay, so, but the fact of the matter is, we are not their friend. We can be an acquaintance as a parent, but when you think about it, a child in crisis and a child in need really needs an adult, because their friends are already telling them what to do and not do, or they're not talking to their friends. And you don't want them getting advice from their friends, because if their friends don't have good advice, it's not going to go nowhere good. So the fact of the matter is, you have to just have a balance. There's a line of respect that is due, but at the same point, you have to be somewhat accommodating and brace yourself.
We almost have to learn a new way to parent in this world, because, you know, I say it's something very similar to folks as well, Michelle, about the fact that we're not having the same experience as 16-year-old, 17 that they are having, because we grew up in a different time altogether. You know, this was really clear to me when my children were like 5 years old, and they would say, "So, mommy, what does a frog eat?" Right? And, you know, for me to get that answer, I would have had to, and when I was their age, go to the Encyclopedia Britannica or one of the others, find the F
and you have to make sure you have the
section,
latest edition now. Come on.
right?
Yeah.
Then look up frog, then find like alphabetically, and right. And now they ask a question. They don't ask sometimes, or when they ask, I would just pick up one of these and go, "What does a frog eat?" And now that they are 16 or 17, they do that themselves. And in fact, I can ask them for information and they can find it faster than I can. So there is definitely a different dynamic to growing up in this society. The other thing is the advent of pop psychology, I think, into our popular culture, where sometimes their analysis of things, I'm telling you, I grew up and I'm going to church on a Sunday, and the people who just come out to church with me, the children, would be walking on the other side of the street because they couldn't walk on the same street as Black people. And then they would be shouting racial slurs from that side of the street. And then, you know, we'd be in the classroom, they'd play little tricks. And I'm saying, we didn't have language for that when I was growing up. That was just pain that you absorbed. Or I went home and got taken care of because my parents would tell me, "You are beautiful, your skin is beautiful, you're a beautiful Black girl, your hair is beautiful." You know, don't worry about these things that you're hearing out there. But now, right, they have a whole language that my son will come to me and say, "Yeah, that's like a microaggression." And I'm like, what? We didn't have those, you know, ways of describing that. So in terms of, I'm seeing, I know you may want to comment on this, and you can just jump right in, but I see that we have a hand up in the audience. So Marjorie Taylor, if you could unmute and ask your question. Is that possible?
I'm sorry, I didn't actually put my hand up. I just commented in the, in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, from my side, I'm seeing a hand up. That's okay. That's the world that we live in these days with Zoom.
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So
If
I'm
I could,
seeing, yes, go ahead, Takia.
sorry, Janelle. I was just going to try to add something to the conversation. I was just going to say that I think especially with family crisis, Specifically in the education sector, oftentimes, at least in my specific position with the TDSB, the majority of the students that I work with, I would say, are in some form of crisis. So I will go into a school that is, they have a large population of students, particularly Black students, that are really struggling in some way or the other, whether it be academically, emotionally, socially, or whatnot. And I would say that one of the trends that I have observed is that oftentimes most of the students that I work with, their trust, both from the student's perspective as well as from the parents' perspective, the trust within the school system is really just not there. Oftentimes, a lot of the students that I'm working with, they've never seen their credit counseling summary before. They don't know who their guidance counselor is. They also don't know who the administration at that particular school. And when you really think about it, that in itself is really a large crisis, I would say, especially in the education sector. That students will go through the entire school year, go through the entire course of high school, and they don't even know who these individuals are. They don't know what their credit counseling summary is like. And oftentimes when you really just sit down and you talk to the students and you really just get to know them, you know, once you develop that trust with them, they start to disclose certain things that are happening with them. They may be the only person in their home that is working.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they are the ones that are supporting the entire family, because for whatever reason, whether it be they come from a dual parent home or a single parent home, you know, the single parent is unable to work. So that student, therefore, they have to work full time. Oftentimes, a lot of the students that I work with, they're working overnight. And then they're expected to be at school for 8 o'clock in the morning, and they have issues with their attendance.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
there's a lot of different dynamics there. And something that occurred in a conversation I was having just yesterday with a young man. He is now about 26 and just about to become a father, starting his own business. But he told me he only has a grade 7 education, because when he was going to school, he wasn't feeling it. He wasn't enjoying it. He wasn't learning the way that they were teaching. It was too rigid and he couldn't handle it. And he would always get in trouble at home when he came to say, I'm not happy going to school. So they put him on Ritalin, I think. And he had the good nature and the good sense, I guess, the wisdom, I would say the wisdom of the ancestors, because as a little boy, he went to the doctor and said, I do not like taking this because it makes me feel.
Yeah.
And he refused to take it. And the doctor tried to give him a different prescription. So I think there are some things that we have done that we cope with. And our children have been forced into this place where they have to fend for themselves to be resilient. And so, you know, to your point about it being an environment that is toxic for them, that we need to be sensitive to that, and we need to listen differently. And I see that there are many comments of agreement with you that really resonate with what you've said around the importance of listening to the children, the importance of understanding all the complexities of what they're dealing with, which is what you have been talking about. So I'd like to move to the next question, put that on the table. And I see
Janelle, just before you go on to the next, I just wanted to quickly share, I'm engrossed in a book now and I want to put it out there because I'm encouraging everyone else who can get it out of the library, get it off Zoom. It's called Parenting for Liberation, A Guide for Raising Black Children. It's Trina Green Brown, and we've been sharing this across TDSB with parents and caregivers simply because it actually just presents an alternative way of our parenting. You know, she talks a lot about liberating ourselves because many of us, we're still parenting from a very colonized way of thinking and being. And what do we mean by that? She articulated that as simply saying, we are still raising our children to be the ones to show up first and the ones to leave last. We set these over on realistic expectations of them, not based on who they are, but based on a very white supremacist sort of colonized environment that's demanding more of them than of anybody else. And so instead of us parenting them to liberate themselves from that, we are actually designing them to become that. And the stress that puts on their kids, on our children, is really what's harming many of them. And the second thing is what was just suggested by Takia, that because many of us don't even recognize that some of those environments are those environments that are harming our kids, because we're still in the place of an education is the best thing, that is our only savior and our only way out and our only liberation. So we force our kids in those spaces, but not tackling those spaces to be sure those spaces are keeping them well. And, you know, she really speaks of us liberating ourselves from the oppression placed on us. Because as parents and caregivers, we are still in that space ourselves. Many of us have yet to even acknowledge the racialized trauma that we sit in every day, that we're eating, breathing every day. We don't think about what that does to our children and our relationships and our homes, because we can't even name it, right? And we spend our days in these stereotypical assumptions of who we're supposed to be, you know, code switching and playing all these roles that we don't even know who we are anymore some days, right? And we come home and we transition that. And so how do we begin to sort of move ourselves out of those places as the significant adults in our children's lives, right? And begin to transition that into something else, right? Where we're resisting these harmful practices that were used on us. Because many of us, let's be honest, I can speak for me. I am here because I had a mother said, education is going to take you out of these places. And you're going to be there and you're going to do what you're going to need to do. I don't care what those people are doing. My mother used to say it all the time. I don't care what those teachers are doing. I don't care the way in which you're doing. My expectation is that you go and get what you need so you can get out and move forward.
Yeah.
But she wasn't always recognizing what was happening and how harmful those places were to my identity.
May I just touch base on something? I'm so sorry. A couple things that were just brought up. One of the things Takia mentioned, and I think it's key, because the counselors in the school have become like saviors. I know many years ago, I won't say how many, Janelle and I won't mention how long ago we were in high school, but the fact of the matter is, when I was in school, we had a family crisis happening and I was dealing with it, and I became more, I was not an extrovert, but I was very good in school. And it took a Black teacher, my accounting teacher, to start to notice the decline in my character, my personality, even my attention and focus to work, or even focus on anything. And I kind of isolated myself because I was going through my own personal trauma. And it was her who spoke up. And she actually, behind my back, connected with my mom and my dad. And I was arranged to see a school counselor. And that's when it was addressed. And I think as much, and he's actually a politician now as we speak, and I remember him very well, but it was nice to be able to finally share with someone, because you can't tell your parents, you can't tell your friends, so who do you talk to? So you internalize everything and the stress shows up in different ways. And I think, like you said, we shouldn't have to have anti-Black racism. Everybody should be entitled to what they're entitled to keep moving and growing and prospering. But the fact of the matter is, I'm so glad that the schools are starting to recognize this, because if you don't understand my culture and you don't understand what's going on at home and you don't understand what's happening in my community, or you don't understand how I'm taking in all the things that are happening to my community, then you cannot counsel me and just tell me just, you know, here. And then that leads to the next situation, medicating our people. that becomes an issue. That's been going on for years. I have a stepson who ended up being medicated, but yet still when I dealt with him, he didn't have to be. And that's the thing, as soon as they can. Our kids are going through what we deal with as the angry Black woman syndrome. Our kids are, if one child throws a tantrum, they're just throwing a tantrum. It's natural, he's 3. If a Black child is 3 and throws a tantrum, well, my word, call the police or, and it's not dealt with appropriately, or because they don't know how to understand this child, or they don't communicate properly with the parents because the parents want to be involved. They go ahead and arrange, the child's always got ADHD. I can't tell you how many Black kids were diagnosed as ADHD and there was nothing wrong with these kids. And most of them actually were smarter than the other children. It's just that they were actually bored in school. And that's the other part. You have to learn to be able to listen, because your child may be excelling to a degree and the school is actually slowing them down.
We also have to learn to balance. There's a part of me, I had a child who was diagnosed very early, very young, and all medications was recommended for them very early, very young. I didn't say no to the medication. What I said was, too early to tell, not yet. I didn't resist and deny medication, folks, because I want to acknowledge that there are some of our children who require it and some of our parents who are denying it. And that denial is bringing harm to our children. So the balance for me is, we've got work to do as the adults in their lives. When the experts say, I think they need, it's okay for us to take a step out and get a second opinion and do a little assessment and research on our own to get a sense of, here's what I'm seeing every day, right? Is it just my child acting out? Is it just my child being the child? Or is there more that I'm not willing to acknowledge as a parent? And if there is, we opted to go, let's look at behavioral therapy. Let's look at a variety of therapy. If that doesn't, then maybe we'll do that. We've not gotten to meds yet because we've decided we're going to stay therapy. And the therapy has been working. But I have come across children who need medication. And we're not providing them the space to do that as the adults in their lives because of our shame and our stigma. It has nothing to do with the children. It's our shame and our stigma. And so it's us ensuring that we figure out what that balance is for every one of our children, because they each need different things.
Yeah, I think in one theme that I'm seeing come up in each of the topics we've talked about is trust. And so what you just described has an element of trust in it that maybe the parents don't have for the system, and really even trusting in ourselves to know our children, to observe them and to do what is right for them. That's another aspect of it. There's a piece where we need to know where to go to get support, to parent in a new way. So you talked about the fact that we're not the same, right? We are not understanding what the children are necessarily facing in the school system. And our either denial of that or our inability to listen carefully and get into it and understand that this is a different time and a different world, we cannot parent the way we were parented. So that's really clear, and that's an issue. But some of the other things that are throwing our children into crisis, I can tell you that I went to a school of grade, and I was talking in the gym to students in grade 5 to 8. And we had them all in the gym and we asked a question. How many of you know someone who has been shot or know someone who has been killed by a bullet in your community? And I could tell you that of the something like maybe 120 kids that were in that gymnasium, I could probably show on just not even reach 2 hands the number of kids who had no experience with that. The majority of those children could say that they had either a family member, a friend, a peer in that age group, or one of their elder siblings, friends that was killed. And so I think there is another stressor that our children are dealing with that keeps them, or that makes them withdraw from dealing with society, withdraw from that trust. It's like there's a public trust broken around their safety in many ways. So they're not safe in terms of their physical health and the physical reality that they could themselves fall victim to such an incident. But also there is the toxic environment that you talked about. So, we were blindly trusting. It also makes me think about redefining what success is. Because, you talked about the fact that we have this one idea that the way to do it, and I've heard it many times in talks. If you talk to parents, they'll say, you need to do 110%. 100% is not good enough. Don't bring home marks any less than this, and so on. So the rigor and we are very, very sure that that is what is going to work, because at one particular point in time, that was something that would make or break you in the society. But now there are so many ways, and the kids will tell you, there's so many ways that I could make a living, make money, do all of these things. So I don't need to have the education in the way. So there's a clash happening that is throwing families. And I think people are really worried about those things. But I wanted to turn the question now to thinking about some of the different indicators and signs that a family may be in crisis mode. And I wonder, because those of us who are out here observing, or maybe talking with a family every day, and we need to get away from, or we need to figure out how to read those tiny incidents that may be happening along the way, and just a slow boil to get us to that place. So how do we recognize family in crisis?
I think
If I
Michelle, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's
Christine.
okay. I was just going to say that I think for me, in order to recognize crisis that's happening in a family, I think first and foremost, you have to be working with that family on a regular basis so that you can have an understanding of what some of their patterns are, what some of their normal behavior, or quote unquote normal behavior, so that you can really sort of compare to see that, if has there been a shift? Has there been a shift in attitude? For example, if a parent is, always punctual to any kind of meetings that we're having, and then all of a sudden now I'm noticing that the parent is now showing up late, or maybe they don't look as presentable as they did before, or just all these various different things. And I think at that point it's really important for any kind of professional. You really want to tap in to just sort of connect with them and sort of see, has anything changed? Has anything happened recently that that is impacting you as an individual, impacting your family and whatnot, and really just trying to get answers to some of those questions. I think it's also extremely important to be very, very observant with families that you are working with as well, so that you can really see some of those cues. Because in a lot of cases, I've noticed that whether it be within the education sector or in the child welfare sector, that I'm able to develop a rapport with the family and develop trust with them, so that they do feel comfortable that, if anything is coming up and whatnot, they can, come to me, or they can also as well possibly, come to me and ask me for any kind of resources and whatnot, if I'm not able to provide them with any specific supports that they need in that time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I think that's good that you mentioned resources too. That's very key. One of the things, I think Michelle and I had already touched on quite a bit of what when you're in crisis, and it becomes a matter of, if you're not coping like you used to, if you are at a point where you can no longer meet your regular responsibilities or function in your regular responsibilities. There is a slight difference between stress and crisis. Stress might be the beginning stage of a crisis, depending on what level of stress it is and what it's you're stressing out. I mean, we have regular everyday stresses. I mean, hey, you wake up in the morning, what are you wearing today? That could stress out someone else. And to me, it could be nothing. But when it becomes a point where it's affecting your functionability as a person, as a parent, as a coworker, as a sister, a brother, whatever role that you play in society, if it starts to have a functioning issue, then it slowly becomes a crisis, especially if you're not in the mode of being able to even do what you're supposed to do to be able to continue to function properly. It's become serious. The stress level has changed. And I think too, when you're in crisis mode is when you don't have anybody to reach out to. And we get that a lot, because if you're dealing with a major problem and it's only escalating and it's weighing on you, and maybe it's you and somebody else and there's nobody else to help, it's not getting resolved. And so it's either just maintaining in crisis mode or it's getting worse. And I think one of the key things is, again, we have to figure out somebody we can trust. And I think that's a difficult thing to do when you have never trusted, or maybe you did and you got hurt in some manner. I mean, you know, it could be anything. It could be marriage, divorce, it could be a family abuse situation, not just kids, but, you know, just anything. Who do you reach out to? Who can you trust with your most private secret? And how do you hold back yourself, lift off the mask of always smiling in everybody's face and making everyone think it's okay, and finally admitting to somebody things are not okay? And that in itself is very difficult, because some people actually function in pretend mode. They will have the biggest things going on in their lives and you would never know it. And they come out their house, they're perfectly put together and smiling and happy. And then they go home and they're suicidal. And so we have to be very careful, because that's what they say. Not everybody who looks like they have it together has it together. And, you know, maybe you're the person everybody goes to and you have nobody to go to. So there always has to be an outlet of being able to find some kind of trust. And worst case scenario, if you can't find anyone to trust, I'm a big person on counseling. I believe it's very important as a person in a church, as a church, for the church. I'm angry with much churches because they believe that you just pray over everything, and you do pray, but you also have to get the help that's required. And sometimes those are the people who aren't necessarily in the church.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you both answered the question from two sides. So on the one hand, there is the role of the helper externally who's looking in, observing, and looking at the signs of when a family is in crisis. But then we also need to be able to recognize for ourselves when we are in crisis. And I really love that you mentioned because you were speaking directly to me there, Pastor, when you talked about the fact that sometimes when you're the person that seems to have it all together, when things start falling apart for you, you don't have anyone really to go to. And so, you know, I did have a situation like that where I said, I said, oh, I can't believe I'm not able to cope with this particular thing. What would I say to people who called me, right? And I would tell them this and that. So then I tried to think, that's what I need to do. And eventually I did have to seek the help of a certified counselor to talk to me, to help me get through. And I really appreciated that moment of vulnerability and that admission myself, because of course, when we are going up and you think, oh, you're a leader, you help people. And so how is it that you are faced with needing help? So I really appreciated that you mentioned that, because I think part of that is about how we notice what's happening for us, how we care for ourselves. And really, it raises the antenna of sensitivity for even the people around us, because once we realize
Yes.
that we also need help as the helpers, and I know I'm speaking, many women don't ask. Many women in our community, the strength, that strong Black woman mythology is there. And so asking for, noticing that we are having a crisis is not something that comes easily for us. So
Amen.
I really appreciate you saying that. And then I'm hearing leaders in particular need someone to speak to, especially professionally. Even therapists need therapists, absolutely. I have another comment in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah,
Just
I was
one more
just gonna say
comment in the
that
chat,
there's,
Michelle. That counseling costs money and many are not able to afford this. How can this be made more affordable? Excellent.
and that's
question.
what I was going to speak to,
Okay.
that they are out there. You do have to do a little work. So I say, if you begin with some of our nonprofit organizations, they do offer you as the beginning stages, where they offer you that service or they extend out. We have a huge extension of health centers across the city of Toronto. So I'd recommend that you begin there to see what services they offer for you and particularly for your children. For those children, parents who have kids that are in schools, there are a number of resources available through your schools that you can access for your children in terms of getting them supports, not just within the staff like our CYCs and CYWs and social workers, but we also have a number of variety of programs that may be accessible and available to you. It's not everything is for free, but I do agree you do have to do a little more work to seek out and find out what those services are. I was just taking a look at Mental Health Ontario. They have a list of resources there that I'm going to encourage that parents may just want to Google them and take a look at what they offer and what some of those referrals are for you to take a look at places that you can even at least begin to find some of those services for yourself.
So I know we've been talking a lot about young people in the family, and I know young people is definitely our focus because of so many good reasons. But I know that there are some families dealing with adults in crisis, with elders in their families in crisis. And so I'm wondering if you might comment on some of the signs that's happening in your family, and you know, my next question coming has to do with how do we actually build that resilience and the coping skills to deal with it in a family. So any comment on other dimensions of the intergenerational stresses and traumas and crisis that families may be facing?
I think if I could start off the conversation, Janelle, I would say that when it comes to intergenerational, I think it's very important to have a support system within your family or extended family as well. It's also very important, I think, to take breaks. You really need to make every effort to take care of yourself. If things are becoming too difficult for you, you definitely need to speak up and let those around you that you trust, let them know that, you know, this is becoming quite difficult for me. I can speak from my own personal experience. When my grandmother passed away about, I think it was about 7 years ago. My grandmother had 7 children. And all of her children are not all located in the same area. Some of my aunts and uncles are in Canada, some are in the US. My grandmother originated from Trinidad, and it became quite difficult, especially in the last couple of years of her life. It became very difficult. But I think in that moment, it was really important within my family that especially all of my grandmother, all of her children really rally together and take turns. So there were times when, you know, some of my aunts and uncles, they would go and spend some time with her. My grandmother did have she had a 24-hour aide because she did live by herself in New York before she passed away. So even having a 24-hour aide, it was also very important as well in that instance, I think, to really be surrounded by family. really be surrounded by love and family and all of that is, I think, is extremely, extremely important. Because I know that I definitely saw it within my own mother, the stress that put on her, as well as on my mom's, all of her other siblings as well during that time, that, you know, because for many, many years, as far as I can remember, my grandmother was always, she was really the glue to our family. Not only did she raise her 7 children, she also raised all of her grandchildren, including myself, as well as her great grandchildren. And she never had to do that. I mean, she raised her 7 kids, and she could have just, you know, once she retired, just lived her own life. But she really made it a mission for her to not only, you know, care for her 7 children that she raised, but also to raise her grandchildren as well as her grandchildren as well. So I think it's really important to lean on family during that time, and really try to create a schedule of some sort. Really just taking breaks is extremely important, because I know firsthand that caring for an elderly family member is very difficult. It has its fair share of challenges, for sure.
And especially, we acknowledge that there are some families that are doing both. They're dealing with the teenagers and the younger children, and then they're also dealing with
The
their
bigger
elders.
children.
So I see that you, the bigger children. I know. There was a saying, you know, twice a child, right?
Exactly. Once a man.
Twice
Exactly.
the child. Yes. You wanted to comment a little bit?
Yes. A very good point that Takia was saying. There's a ton of programs out there, and back again, we're into the resources. Call the people who know who to call, the people who know how to reach the people. Talk to anybody, everybody, because somebody will have somebody's name, or they'll say, no, I don't deal with this, but listen, let me get you a number for so-and-so, because then they know this resource. You have to. And you know what? If you're going through crisis, I know it's hard to push, but if you can just love yourself and know that if you could reach out to at least 1 or 2 people, let those people be your heart. Let those 2 people be your legs. Let those 2 people be your strength, because they can find the help that you need. When people are in the middle of a family crisis, especially when it comes to people like elderly. One of my other hats, I'm a retired paralegal of 30 years, and I'm a senior law clerk at a major law firm. We deal with elder abuse. We deal with nursing home abuse. So it's very important, as Takia said, you have to take breaks. I deal with, unfortunately, end of life in many formats, legally as well as a pastor. Everybody needs a break. The caregiver is so drained. And that's why hospice actually has a hospice for the hospice caregiver. Cancer people, they have people who help you. They'll watch your kids for the day. They'll send you out and let you do your thing. Everybody needs a break. If you can't reach out to a resource that will help give you a break, or just a moment to go and just relax, or even if it's to just go and talk to somebody, just unwind. And yes, I might knock the church sometimes, but I'm a pastor, and I know there are pastors out there who will love you, and your church folks who are good Christian folk will love you to death, and they're good people to talk to. They're encouragers. They will pray with you, and it will lift a burden off of you too. But the other thing that's very important is you have family. And I think too, when it comes to elderly, you may have one sibling who has responsibility of taking care of the aging or elderly parent, or the parent who might be going through dementia or ill, or, you know, struggling. If you have other siblings, you have other cousins, you have other people, you got to work with your family network first. They may know somebody who could help, or come in every other day or once a week to give you a break, but it's very important. So Takia, absolutely, you need to take that break, you need to breathe, and you have to be able to know that you can reach out to just take a step back, because your sanity is key.
And, you know, one of the things that I've become present to since taking on this role with Children's Aid Society is that when we talk about those networks of family, it's not there for everyone. in the same way. And so I think it's important also for us as a community to offer, to take the initiative, to make the call. You know, I have to say, I am married to an amazing man, but what I watch with him is that he cares for the elders in his family. He calls and checks on them, right? And it makes me cognizant of the need to call and check what's happening with the elders. And in the same way, you know, we need to call and check on the families that we know have single parents, or even those who have married people, and just how you guys doing? How are you coping? Do you need? I think that kind of thing is something that maybe if we lived in closer quarters, we would see, we would notice, we would be able to respond to. We would see those signs that you talked about, Takia, right? We would see the patterns changing, and we would be able to say, you know what? It looks like Janelle needs some help, right? And so we're gonna, you know, and I think some of the things, actually my son told me about something that they're doing at university, which I'll share because I thought, that idea could be expanded. And so he's going to school with a few other Black students that are from, well, you know, he's going to a school where there's mostly white students. Okay, well, where is there not a school where that's not going to be the case? And they have what they call a cook up susu going. So each of them cooks, and they come to each other's place to hang out and eat. And they'll cook together sometimes, or one person will prepare the meal. So it's taking the stress of that, but it's also providing a spectacular opportunity for them to connect and to socialize and to check in with each other and so on. And you mentioned earlier, Michelle, isolation as being one of the things that puts us into crisis. And I would say that for all the reasons that we talked about around pride and stigma, and maybe an inability to see, or maybe just running so fast ourselves that we don't see when the crisis is creeping up, that we really need to practice that checking in and getting out there and being a little bit more intentional about looking after each other. And I'm really holding that because I know that that would benefit many of the elders out there who are aging. We're living, that's the other thing I wanted to mention. We as a community and as a society are living a lot longer. And we know that it's healthiest to stay, for your mind, to stay in a place that's familiar to you and all that. But in order to facilitate that, you do have to have people just checking in and seeing how you're doing. So I wanted to bring that up.
I used to have a program, part of the pastoral ministry that I had started when well, in the Windsor region at least, because Toronto's way too big. We used to call it the shut-in service. And literally we developed a call-in line for elderly people or sick people or people who were shut in, because even I, in a bad car accident, was bound to a wheelchair for almost a whole year. Was homebound for 6 months and couldn't leave my home because I couldn't walk because of my leg. So we developed a program that we would have people who could help and volunteer, or for a small donation if they wanted. It was optional, where we could either run errands for them, get food, simple little things. And when you're in crisis, you're not able to function at these levels. There are people who are in bed and won't get out of their bed. So they're definitely not eating. They're certainly not going anywhere. Some of the crisis could be a mental health issue where they literally become anxious to be even going outside their doors. And so, as you said, we have to make ourselves very visible so people can see and people will know that there's help. That's what I think. I've always said this, and I say this on my own show, that the structure of the church and the business of the church has changed considerably, because back home in the old days, if anybody needed something, you went to the church. and everybody in the church would help. There's always some kind of ministry fund where there's an emergency fund for somebody. So-and-so don't have food. You get a basket together and you bring over food. And I still do that mentality because I think it's important. But the thing is, social services have now stepped in to where a lot of the churches used to have to do that. And what's happening is social service isn't always equally opportunity either, because there are people who are getting who shouldn't, and there are people who aren't getting who need to. And that can put you in crisis mode. So we have to be able to know or allow people to reach out somehow and have a backup plan to help those who need.
And so, can we just, in the last few minutes that we have together, ponder some concrete steps that people can take to help families or to respond to families in crisis? Even if you've already mentioned it, just want to leave with some key points that people can really grasp.
The first thing is what you said. You have to recognize it. If you know of a person or a family in crisis, if they're not reaching out, then you need to reach back. I'm going to say, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that goes for the people in crisis and the people out of crisis. The fact of the matter is, if you know better, you need to do better. And so if you know you're in a position to help somebody, or even if you're not in that position, then find somebody who is in a position to help somebody in crisis. You have to be able to call them. I've knocked on doors before. I've called people. I will call so-and-so who knows so-and-so. Or what you do as a group, even a small group, just a bunch of friends, maybe take on, adopt somebody. I remember ice storms and things like that. I was inviting complete strangers to my house for Christmas because I knew they couldn't function. It doesn't matter who it is. And so we have to be open to be able to help. But if we can recognize or at least work together to find people in need.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Michelle.
I'll build on that it's okay to lean in to the crisis, lean into it. There are many of us that get so overwhelmed with it. We put blinders on and we pretend that we're not in it. And if we don't lean in, it gets worse. And so lean in for me, I think someone in the chat dropped the crisis line. Lean in by picking up the phone and saying, and this is you, the adult, you, the parent, or you, the caregiver, saying, you know what, I'm not doing okay right now. Have that conversation with someone else in that moment and get a couple tools that's going to help you step out of that moment. And practice self-care. Self-care don't require anything grand, right? Grandeur is not about self-care. Self-care is saying, you know what, I need a moment. I'm just going to go outside and get some fresh air. Or my greatest self-care is a lavender bath. And all that is $1, lavender, some salt from the dollar store in some water, and it soothes and heals and restore. Keep a routine. When you're going through a situation, keep your routines going, because what happens is your body and your entire body shifts. You begin to get lethargic. You begin to feel depressed. So if you could just keep a few things going and keeping your routine going, that'd be incredible. And I'm going to say, we didn't talk about much of social media today. And I say, stop, don't overexpose yourself. When you're in spaces of crisis, this overexposure that I'm seeing on social media, and you're actually taking advice from social media, I just don't know if that's always the place to do that. So limit that excessive exposure of it and find the healthy spaces and to be reaching out and getting some supports and guidance around. Takia, what are you thinking?
I think just to add to that, some tips that I would provide with anybody watching or in the audience today, that I think it's important to have a list of some self-care items. I think everybody is different in terms of what they may consider as self-care, but I think it's definitely important to just create a list for yourself and just have that list somewhere visible and just try to make a conscious effort to, if you can practice self-care every day, I would highly recommend it. But if self-care on a daily basis is not possible, I would say definitely try to tune in to those signs, those internal signs for yourself that, you know what, I think I'm starting to feel a little bit burned out, or I'm feeling a little bit stressed. I feel like, this situation may go into a crisis. How can I sort of alleviate that from happening? Do I need to maybe be around family? You don't want to be alone. You want to be around people. And when I say be around people, you want to be around positive individuals that are really going to fill your cup in that moment where, you are feeling a bit tapped out. Definitely. I think just having those personal resources for yourself, doing yoga. I personally really recommend any kind of physical activity, any kind of movement. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can go onto YouTube. You can, watch any type of workout and just follow along. Any kind of movement activity of some sort. Definitely getting out, getting some exposure to the sun, especially during the winter months when we don't have as much sun over here. I think all of those things are extremely, extremely important. I'm also a really big advocate of writing. I think writing is extremely, extremely important. And just being honest with yourself, whether you want to journal or you want to, some people may not be able to write the words of how they're feeling. They may feel the need to draw pictures, diagrams, whatever, of how it is that you're feeling. Just find some way, some outlet to really just get whatever it is that you're feeling, try to get that on paper. So you want to get it from your head and just
onto
get
the
it
paper.
out onto the paper.
Thank you so very
I
much
call it
for that.
a checkup from
We
the
have
neck up.
limited time left. So I just want to go out to, I see Dr. Anna Jarvis has her hand up. Did you want to make a comment?
Ladies, you have hit the nail on the head. Excellent advice. Thank you. The only thing I would add is, when the crisis is over, your job isn't over. Unless we feed forward, right? And we prepare the way or hold the gate open for others to follow through how we survived, we haven't completed the task. Once it's over, have frank discussions with family and girlfriends and other parents. And I love the comment, our men, we let them off the hook far too often, but we are not going there today. So we need to openly say, folks, you may not have realized it, but I was in crisis. And by the way, that crisis line saved me from hitting my kid when I wanted to murder that 14-year-old. And therefore, he didn't get taken from me, right? The crisis lines help. And we need, if we've seen the school is toxic, guess what? Put on our big girl panties and get out there and volunteer. And we need to be the voice saying, that's not abnormal. In our community, our children do have X and Y for lunch. Have you tried offering it to everyone? And just that word I have to add, ladies, when the crisis is over, let us try and make the path smoother for the rest of the ladies in the community.
Well, that is an absolutely perfect way to close off our discussion today. And I just want to thank you for sharing that wisdom, because I think it is important that as we think about how to deal with families in crisis and to carry on the legacies, we remember that we are connected to those who made sacrifices in the past and who reached their hand out to help us. And we need to do the same for others. So thank you so much for that beautiful message. And I want to thank all the panelists for your wisdom sharing today, for the very lively discussion, for the resources that you shared that I'm sure will be helpful to many of those who've joined us on the line. So I see that it is about that time, and I just want to say thank you so very much to everyone and to handling all the tech. You may not have known that behind the scenes, Taki is also assisting with our tech. So thank you so much for that.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never